Arthur Westwood was a man of immense wealth, power, and privilege. A self-made billionaire, he was known for his sharp business acumen and lavish lifestyle. However, behind the grandeur of his sprawling mansion and prestigious reputation lay a man ruled by pride and prejudice. 20 years ago, his life took a turn he would never forget. Alice, the young black maid who worked in his household, had captured his attention. She was hardworking, kind, and beautiful in a way that was both understated and undeniable. Their brief affair was a secret, one Arthur convinced himself would have no consequences. But consequences came. Alice became pregnant. Arthur, consumed by fear of scandal and societal judgment, turned on her the moment he saw that the baby was a black child. In a fit of anger, Arthur accused Alice of deception. "You planned this, didn't you? You thought you trapped me with this child that couldn't possibly be mine," he spat, his voice filled with venom. Alice, cradling the newborn in her arms, replied with quiet dignity. "This is your son, Arthur. Whether you claim him or not, he is yours." Arthur's face contorted with rage. "Get out. Both of you. Don't ever show your faces here again." And so, Alice left, clutching her son and her pride. 20 years later, Arthur's life was a shadow of what it had once been. His marriage to a socialite named Eleanor was cold and barren. Despite their efforts, they had no children. The mansion that once bustled with life was eerily quiet, and Arthur, though still wealthy, felt the weight of his loneliness. One afternoon, Arthur decided to visit a local art gallery. As he strolled through the exhibits, a particular painting caught his eye, a breathtaking portrait of a young black man with piercing eyes and a captivating smile. The artist's name was James Carter. "Excuse me," Arthur asked a nearby curator, "who is this James Carter?" The curator smiled. "He's a rising star in the art world. That's him over there." Arthur turned to see a tall, confident young man speaking to a group of admirers. His heart skipped a beat. The resemblance to Alice was undeniable. Before Arthur could gather his thoughts, a familiar voice spoke behind him. "Surprised to see him, Arthur?" Arthur spun around to see Alice, standing there with grace and poise. Time had been kind to her, but her eyes held a strength he had never noticed before. "Alice," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "It's been so long." 20 years, she said evenly. "But who's counting?" Arthur struggled to find words. Is he my son?" Alice crossed her arms, her expression a mixture of sadness and defiance. "Yes, Arthur. James is your son. The boy you rejected. The boy you threw out along with me." Arthur's face paled. "I was wrong, Alice. I was a fool." Alice's eyes narrowed. "Wrong? Foolish? You were cruel, Arthur. You abandoned us because you couldn't face the truth. But let me tell you something shocking. James grew up just fine without you. He's brilliant, talented, and kind, everything you're not." Arthur looked down, his guilt overwhelming. "I want to make it right. I want to be part of his life, Alice." Alice shook her head, her voice firm. "You don't get to decide that now. James doesn't even know who you are. And frankly, Arthur, I'm not sure he needs to." Just then, James approached, his smile fading as he sensed the tension. "Mom, is everything okay?" Alice turned to her son, her expression softening. "Yes, James. This is Arthur Westwood, an old acquaintance." James extended a hand, oblivious to the weight of the moment. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Westwood." Arthur shook his son's hand, tears welling in his eyes. "The pleasure is mine, James." As James returned to his admirers, Arthur looked at Alice with pleading eyes. "Please, Alice. Give me a chance to make amends." Alice sighed, her resolve wavering. "You'll have to earn it, Arthur. James deserves the truth, but whether he lets you into his life is his choice, not mine, and certainly not yours." Over the following months, Arthur made every effort to reconnect with James. He attended art exhibits, supported his career, and shared stories of his own troubled past. Slowly, he began to build a relationship with the son he had once rejected. For Arthur, the journey was humbling. He learned that wealth could never replace love, and the family he had always longed for was one he had driven away. As he stood at James's latest gallery opening, surrounded by Alice and the son who had forgiven him, Arthur finally understood the true meaning of legacy. As time flies, Arthur finally invited James and Alice to dinner at an upscale restaurant. He had taken care to reserve a private dining room, wanting to avoid the prying eyes of the public. As they sat down, the tension in the air was palpable. Alice, ever poised, sipped her wine in silence. James, however, wasted no time. "So, Mr. Westwood," James began, his tone sharp, "what made you decide to suddenly play the role of a father?" Arthur winced at the question but nodded, acknowledging its fairness. "I don't have a good excuse, James. I was selfish, afraid, and blind. I made terrible decisions, and I've regretted them every day since." James leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Regret doesn't change the past, does it? You lived your life while Mom struggled to raise me alone." Alice spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "James, let him speak. He's here now, and that's more than I expected." Arthur looked at Alice, gratitude flashing in his eyes. "Thank you," he murmured before turning to James. "You're right. Regret doesn't change the past. But I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here to learn about you, to support you if you'll let me." James's eyes narrowed. "Support me how? With money? Because I don't need it." Arthur shook his head. "Not with money. With time, with presence. I want to be there for you now, even if it's late. And if you'll allow me, I want to help you achieve your dreams." James was silent for a long moment. "You say you want to know me. Fine. Tell me this, what would you have done if I'd been born white? Would you have kept me then?" The question hit Arthur like a blow to the chest. He opened his mouth, then closed it, struggling for an answer. Finally, he spoke. "I'd like to say yes, but the truth is, I don't know. I was a coward, James. I let fear dictate my actions, and I paid the price. I'm paying it still." The dinner ended on a somber note, but something shifted that night. For the first time, James saw a glimmer of sincerity in Arthur's eyes. Weeks turned into months, and Arthur persisted. He attended every one of James's gallery openings, quietly supporting him from the sidelines. He reached out to Alice often, not only to talk about James but to apologize for the pain he had caused her. One day, Alice finally relented. She invited Arthur to her modest home for dinner. As they ate, Alice spoke candidly. "You know, Arthur, there were times I hated you. Times I wished you would suffer as I did. But as I've watched you these past months, I've seen a man trying to change. Maybe it's too late for us, but it's not too late for James." Arthur nodded, his voice heavy with emotion. "Thank you, Alice. That means more than you know." The real breakthrough came during one of James's gallery events. Arthur, seeing James overwhelmed by the attention, stepped in to support him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur said, his voice commanding the room, "I'd like to say a few words about this remarkable artist. James Carter is not only a visionary but also a man of incredible strength and character. It is my greatest honor to stand here today, not just as a supporter, but as his father." The room fell silent, and James looked at Arthur, his eyes wide with surprise. Slowly, applause began to ripple through the crowd. After the event, James approached Arthur. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his tone softer than before. "I wanted to," Arthur replied. "I'm proud of you, James. I always will be." James hesitated, then extended his hand. When Arthur took it, James pulled him into a brief but heartfelt embrace. Over time, Arthur became a fixture in James's life, not as a savior, but as a father eager to learn and grow. Alice, too, found herself softening toward Arthur, though she never let him forget the years of pain. In the end, Arthur discovered that wealth wasn't measured in dollars or possessions but in relationships, love, and forgiveness. The journey was painful, but it led him to something priceless, a second chance at the family he thought he had lost forever. And for the first time in years, Arthur Westwood felt truly rich.